So we're going to pick it up from here and continue following the breaking news about the president's son, Hunter Biden. CBS News has learned that he has reached a federal plea agreement. Hunter Biden plans to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges and admit to illegally possessing a firearm while a drug user. This follows a federal probe into his business dealings. So straight away, we want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson to talk about this. So, you know, we should say that there was a many years investigation into Hunter Biden, his business practices, whether or not he was operating as a foreign agent and not actually, you know, registering as one. At the end of the day, things have whittled down to these 2 tax charges and this question of whether or not he lied on a form when he purchased a firearm. The question was, are you currently using drugs? So my question to you is, what do you make of this filing?
So what I make of the filing, I think you laid it out exactly right, which is there was this very broad investigation. We've heard about it, of course, in the political arena for a very long time now. And oftentimes this happens where there's an investigation into more than is actually charged. And we haven't seen, or I haven't seen, the actual charging document yet. And of course, that is the binding document. That's what they agreed to. But what this indicates is that the Department of Justice thought this is where they could get an agreement. This is where they, if they went to trial, could show proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Will this quiet the critics who say, no, this should have been broader, this should have dealt with failing to register as a foreign agent? I don't think it will quiet the critics. And I think that we will continue to see that the House will hold hearings, that there will additionally be investigations into Hunter Biden. But at least for some, this might answer the question as to why Hunter Biden was not charged with anything where, and we can fill in the blank, others were. So I think for some people, it answers that question, that in fact, Hunter Biden was charged and did come to an agreement with the Department of Justice.
And Catherine, sorry, we have so many correspondents that have been reporting on this, Jessica. But am I to understand that David Weiss, the United States Attorney, is a appointee of the former president of the United States, and because we've talked about the politics surrounding the investigations into Hunter Biden, President Biden or the Department of Justice, could they have removed this attorney if they thought that there was some politics involved here, or not? And if in not doing so, does that signify that the president was trying to distance himself for any investigation into his son?
Any day I might be confused with Catherine Herridge, a good day. But so what does this indicate? Yes, I mean, President Biden, I think, has tried to distance himself as much from the Department of Justice inquiries into both his political rival, former President Trump, that's why a special counsel was appointed, and into his son. And we have said this before in other situations, but I think the further President Biden is away from Merrick Garland, for him, the better. I don't think this is somebody he wants to see across a room. Maybe he wants to wave. But the point here is that President Biden, I think for a whole host of reasons, wants it not just to appear that the Department of Justice is operating independently, but for it actually to operate independently. Could he have said to Merrick Garland, I think this is a situation where we need a special counsel? Of course, that's his prerogative to do so. But in ways big and small, I think President Biden has made a concerted effort to stay out of this investigation, to say over and over again, the Department of Justice needs to operate independently of me, and to ensure that the attorney who oversaw this was not one of his specific political appointees.
All right, Jessica. Is Jessica sticking around with us? I'm asking the producer. Okay, Jessica, you hang tight. We want to bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe, to talk a little bit more about this. I guess first question is, you know, have we heard a response for the White House? But what we really want to get into is the political fallout. But have we heard anything from the White House thus far?
So let's remind our audience that the president's waking up this morning in the Bay Area. He's got another series of events today in and around San Francisco, raising money for his re-election campaign, an event regarding the future of artificial intelligence, meeting with some academics and technology executives there. We have not yet heard from the White House. We're anticipating some kind of written statement from somebody here, whether it's the president, whether it's some other aide speaking on his behalf. I got to say, though, guys, and I think we know this well, having covered this over the course of the last several years, this issue, Hunter Biden, his legal, his personal issues, is the hot potato, is the third rail, is the thing that does not go discussed on or off the record around here for fear of upsetting the president and the first lady and the incredibly tight-knit, close Biden clan. So when or if there is some kind of a statement, you know it will be carefully vetted through the president and the family before it is given out by somebody, whether, again, it's the president or aides. And again, we should reiterate, the president has been defiant and supportive of his son throughout, perhaps more publicly in recent months, where we've seen Hunter Biden now in public alongside his parents a lot more, whether it was at the Kennedy Center Honors in December, whether it was at the French President's State Dinner, on the road with the president in Ireland in April. This reporter saw him at the Easter egg roll with his young son, among other times here at the White House. So you get a sense that the family has understood some kind of resolution was coming. And we also know that Hunter Biden himself and his legal team were preparing to sort of hit back, either in the legal or public space, against those that have been so critical of him, have been invoking his name and situation in comparison to what has befallen former President Trump and other Republican figures. And yet, as you said, the political fallout, what's that going to be? Well, look, it's only come in the last few minutes, but we can anticipate Republicans, whether they be up on Capitol Hill or out on the campaign trail, are going to be raising a lot of questions today about the details of this. The fact that it appears to say that the tax charges go away, that the gun thing sort of hangs over him for the next 2 years, but that all other matters are essentially closed. There will be questions from Republican lawmakers and undoubtedly Republican presidential candidates as to why that is. And then there'll be questions about the timing. Why did it take 5 years? Why is this being announced now, just a week after former President Donald Trump was indicted in a federal court in Miami? Is there any connection? Remember, there has been no connection. There's been a special counsel investigating the former president on January 6th related matters, on the classified documents related matters. The Trump-appointed U.S. attorney from Wilmington has been dealing with the Hunter Biden situation since at least 2020, was held over by the Biden administration so as to remove any suggestion of political favoritism or meddling by the White House, and has been allowed to stay on to finish this case and other matters. And now we'll see in the coming days whether a federal judge in Delaware agrees with this plea agreement and the situation is allowed to move forward. So forgive me as I keep checking email and whatnot.
While you do that, Ed, while you do that,
but we don't have it yet.
Okay, while you do that, sorry, you don't have a statement from the White House, Ed?
Not yet.
Okay, all right. While you keep checking email, let me bring in Jessica, and then Ed, I'm going to ask you the same question. There's a statement out from Hunter Biden's lawyer, Jessica Christopher Clark, and he says this, quote, "With the announcement of 2 agreements between my client, Hunter Biden, and the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Delaware, it is my understanding that the 5-year investigation into Hunter is resolved." Now, Jessica, my question to you, is that just spin? And then after you answer, Ed, you pointed out that there may be some howling from Republicans. They're still howling about Whitewater and Benghazi when it comes to former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Does it matter if they're howling if the investigation is truly closed? Jessica, you first.
So is it spin? Yes and no. If the attorney has been told by the Department of Justice that this is it, these are the charges, and there's nothing more to come, then that's it for the Department of Justice. But I think the second part of your question is the reason why, yes, maybe this is spin, because we are still investigating Benghazi, we are still investigating Whitewater, and we will still be investigating Hunter Biden, meaning the political arena is entirely different. So when it comes to the House and the House committees, as we said a few moments ago, they will continue to investigate. This will not be the end for them. And we can talk about whether or not there's a legal basis to do so, or whether or not the Department of Justice could always reopen. I think what will be really key for us is if there's any language in the charging documents that indicate to us that the Department of Justice has said, that's it, case closed, we're done. Of course, I'm paraphrasing here, but the House investigations are going to continue, let's be honest.
Ed.
Sure. And because this is just the latest example of it. You mentioned Hillary Clinton's issues, you mentioned the Benghazi situation, you mentioned Whitewater. Already I can see some examples from conservative commentators just in the social media space, saying that this is just the latest proof that two members of different political parties or their offspring are being treated differently by the nation's justice system. Now, is that a widely held belief among a majority of Americans? Time will tell. But if it's going to be a popular rallying cry on the Republican side, then it's just going to continue to chip away at public confidence in the legal system, in the Justice Department, in the FBI, and in the federal courts at a time when those institutions are engaged in other high-stakes legal matters, including, of course, the situation with the former president. We cannot emphasize it enough. These are separate matters, started on different timelines, overseen by different prosecutors who have discretion. But in the public space, the former president and his allies will continue to argue that they are somehow the same or should be treated the same, even though there have been different responses from the subject of those investigations. The former president alleged to have held on to things that were asked of him by the National Archives and the Justice Department and the FBI, whereas Hunter Biden eventually lawyered up, paid back his taxes, and has been in negotiations apparently, or subject to some kind of an investigation now for 5 years. Certainly there'll be questions about why did it take 5 years? Why wasn't this resolved sooner? Why didn't the prosecutor bring charges earlier on? What were they waiting for? And we'll see if we learn those details. We may never. And it's not necessarily for us to know, because this is a private legal matter, even though he is the son of the president.
Ed,
go ahead, Anne-Marie.
We're going to talk to Scott MacFarlane, but I just want to ask you this in terms of sort of the political impact, right? So what no doubt some Republicans are going to be trying to do is chip away at President Biden. But as you point out, this narrative is likely to chip away at people's faith in the Justice Department. I am curious, President Biden, and I'm going to use some words that it's going to sound cynical. I'm not attempting to sound cynical, but he's sort of acquired some political currency, if you will, about, his own relationship with his sons, the loss of Beau Biden, and, the fact that he has a son who struggled with addiction, like millions of Americans out there can certainly appreciate. I wonder if Democratic voters even care about this Hunter Biden issue. They already know that, Hunter Biden's the son that's a bit of the problem child for the president. Do they care? It doesn't come up in polling necessarily. It doesn't come up in our conversations with voters. I think you're right. They understand that this is a father and son who've had a complex relationship since he was a young age, since the death unexpectedly of his mother and his sister in that Christmas time car crash, just weeks after then Senator Biden was elected to the U.S. Senate. It's something that he told our Anthony Mason a few years ago is traumatic and continued to cause great pain for him, and was a big factor in the addiction issues that he has faced ever since. And so, there are those certainly that will see it as that private health and behavioral matter. But there are those, of course, on the other side who see this as something more nefarious. And look, one of the things, remember, that often gets talked about is, was Hunter Biden out there doing business deals on his own behalf, but also on behalf of his father, who was then either sitting vice president or former vice president? And we know from our reporting that back in 2014, when the then vice president was visiting Ukraine and dealing with a different political crisis at the time there, and Hunter Biden started making trips over there, that there were Obama administration officials concerned that maybe he was taking advantage of his dad's position for, personal gain. He wouldn't be the first brother, son, daughter, wife, cousin of a political figure to do that. It may just speak to a broader concern that people have about the children of candidates or the children of office holders being able to do certain things given who their parents or their uncles or their brothers and sisters are. And so that's part of a broader conversation. But, as for Democrats, they have, for the most part, rallied around them. And I suspect they will continue to do so. And I also suspect you're going to hear some Democrats today, defenders of the White House, say, look, this is a matter in which the person that was subject to the investigation cooperated, paid back taxes, and has sought resolution. The former president, of course, is in a different situation, in part because of things he refused to do or turn over.
as alleged by federal prosecutors.
All right, Ed, thanks. We are going to pivot over to CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane, who've been talking about whether or not this is going to silence the critics. Scott, there's a House committee that has been investigating the Biden family businesses. An interim report came up with not much of anything. But what's the likelihood that this will put an end to that arm of the investigation, congressional investigation?
Well, nothing is certain in life, but it seems certain this will not quiet the congressional critics of the Biden administration and of the Justice Department's handling of political themed or politically tied prosecutions. Here's the immediate reaction, one from a House member, one from a Senate member on the Republican conference. House Republican Darrell Issa, who used to chair the House Oversight Committee, says, quote, Hunter pleading guilty to tax evasion is only the first crack in the Biden corruption cover-up. Congressman Issa indicating what so many other Republicans have indicated already, that their investigation is broader than Hunter Biden. They're alleging ties between the Biden family and foreign influence peddlers, an allegation that is yet to be corroborated. Now the Senate reaction. Tom Cotton, the Republican senator, says, quote, let's be clear, if anyone without the Biden last name engaged in even a fraction of Hunter's misconduct, they'd face real consequences. Tom Cotton echoing any number of his colleagues who say, again, that there is a two-tiered justice system, that it favors Democrats. This is part of an extended argument some Republicans have made about the investigation and prosecutions of January 6th and the new prosecution in Florida of former President Trump. There are subpoenas that have been issued by the House Oversight Committee for bank records belonging to Hunter Biden. No indication that investigation is going to stop because of this criminal case. There's a broader investigation by congressional investigators into a Hunter Biden business colleague, Devin Archer, who they subpoenaed for a deposition. There's no indication any of this stops because of this plea agreement. In fact, it may accelerate some of the calls from Republicans to dig deeper into the Department of Justice.
Indeed, Scott. Thank you very much. I would just tell everyone that, of course, we're going to continue to cover this story at the top of the hour. CBS News senior investigative reporter Catherine Herridge is going to be joining the stream with an update for us, so stick around.